July 30, 1921, room 42 of the medical building at the University of Toronto. The ambient temperature is 90 degrees. Frederick Banting, an indebted, disgraced orthopedic surgeon, and 22-year-old undergraduate Charles Best stand over a dying terrier. Dog 410 is slipping into a terminal diabetic coma. Its blood glucose has spiked to a lethal 0.20%. The animal's breathing is shallow, heavily labored, and thick with the chemical stench of ketones. Banting holds a glass syringe. Inside the barrel rests exactly 4 cubic centimeters of a murky, freezing slush, macerated dog pancreas suspended in Ringer's solution. He is about to force an unrefined, highly volatile biological cocktail directly into the terrier's jugular vein. Across the Atlantic, vacationing on the moors of Scotland, the world's preeminent authority on carbohydrate metabolism, Professor J.J.R. MacLeod considers Banting a dangerous, ignorant amateur. MacLeod granted the destitute surgeon this derelict attic lab and 10 stray dogs solely to remove him from his office. The professor remains absolutely certain this crude endeavor will yield nothing but necrotic tissue and failure. Banting finds the jugular. He pierces the vein. He depresses the plunger. The fluid enters the bloodstream, a desperate final counteroffensive against an absolute death sentence. Outside the sweltering confines of room 42, the medical establishment offers no cures. A diagnosis of diabetes mellitus type 1 in 1921 operates as a mandate for a slow, agonizing execution. The human body, stripped of its ability to regulate energy, undergoes total systemic collapse. Without the pancreas's phantom internal secretion, glucose cannot breach the cellular membrane. The body's 30 trillion cells literally starve while the bloodstream overflows with dense, unusable sugar. In a frantic bid for survival, the liver dumps massive reserves of glycogen. The kidneys rapidly fail, desperately attempting to filter the heavy, syrupy blood, triggering catastrophic dehydration. Deprived of glucose, the body initiates a brutal self-cannibalization protocol. It rapidly breaks down its own skeletal muscle and fat reserves. This accelerated lipolysis floods the vascular system with toxic byproducts known as ketones. The blood pH drops precipitously, turning highly acidic. The patient begins to hyperventilate, gasping for air, as the lungs attempt to blow off the excess acid, their breath reeking of rotting apples. Blindness, gangrene, and organ failure follow in rapid, ruthless succession. Diabetic ketoacidosis represents the final stage. The brain swells. The patient slips into a coma from which no human being has ever awakened. The supreme medical authorities of Europe and North America have surrendered to this biological siege. They possess exactly one sanctioned protocol to manage the physiological collapse. Dr. Frederick Allen of the prestigious Rockefeller Institute champions this regimen of state-sponsored starvation. To prevent the lethal buildup of blood glucose and ketones, the elite medical consensus dictates that caloric intake must plummet to an absolute emaciating minimum. The Allen diet demands total compliance, restricting patients to a brutal baseline of mere survival. Physicians lock children diagnosed with the disease, like 14-year-old Leonard Thompson, onto rations of just 400 calories a day. Nurses feed them daily meals of thrice-boiled vegetables, cabbage and spinach, boiled repeatedly to strip away all carbohydrates and nutritional value, leaving only fibrous, empty bulk. The patients exist as living skeletons. Their hair falls out in clumps. Their linear growth ceases completely. Their bones turn brittle. The most advanced, prestigious hospitals in the world feature wards filled entirely with starving, dying children. These rows of cots hold patients weighing 30, 40, or 50 pounds. Their skin stretched tight over protruding rib cages, their eyes sunken into dark, hollow sockets. Physicians keep them in a perpetual state of agonizing hunger simply to delay the inevitable lapse into ketoacidosis by a few months, perhaps a year. The attending doctors and elite physiologists walk these aisles, accepting the mass death as a fixed, unalterable biological reality. The elite consensus deems intervention chemically impossible. The hypothetical internal secretion of the pancreas cannot be isolated. The greatest scientific minds on Earth insist that the organ's own exocrine digestive enzymes, primarily trypsin, instantly destroy the delicate endocrine hormone the millisecond extraction begins. It is a biological lockbox welded shut by millions of years of evolution. The medical establishment has declared the internal secretion a ghost, abandoning the search. The starvation protocol stands as the absolute limit of human medical capability. Millions will die, and the world's most highly decorated doctors have coldly, clinically accepted their fate. The European scientific aristocracy did not surrender to diabetes without first attempting to conquer it. For 3 decades, the most heavily credentialed physiologists on Earth launched aggressive chemical campaigns to extract the elusive internal secretion. They failed catastrophically. In Berlin, 1906, Dr. Georg Zuelzer extracted fluid from calf pancreases and injected it into dying diabetic patients. The results were horrific. The subjects violently convulsed, spiked 104-degree fevers, and vomited. In 1915, Israel Kleiner in New York achieved temporary glucose drops in dogs, but his serum triggered the same monstrous physiological backlash. The extracts were highly toxic biological poisons. The elite recognized a fundamental, insurmountable biological paradox. The pancreas is a chemical cannibal. It functions as a dual-purpose factory. Deep within its tissue reside the islets of Langerhans, the endocrine clusters theorized to produce the life-saving hormone. But the vast majority of the organ consists of exocrine tissue, the acini cells, which manufacture trypsin. Trypsin is an aggressive, highly destructive digestive enzyme engineered by millions of years of evolution to break down complex proteins in the gut. The precise microsecond a physiologist grinds up a pancreas in a laboratory, the acini cells rupture. The trypsin floods the mixture and instantly shreds the fragile hormone protein into useless amino acids. It is an impenetrable lockbox. Extraction is biologically impossible. The medical establishment, men with doctoral degrees from Oxford, Cambridge, and Heidelberg, officially closed the book. They codified the absolute impossibility of isolating the hormone. On October 31, 1920, at exactly 2 a.m., in a sparsely furnished rented room in London, Ontario, a 28-year-old orthopedic surgeon stumbled onto the flaw in their impenetrable lockbox. Frederick Banting was not an elite physiologist. His professional life was a catastrophic failure. He carried heavy debts from his military service in World War I. He recently opened a private surgical practice. In his first 28 days of operation, he treated a single patient and earned exactly $4. Facing financial ruin, he accepted a humiliating demotion to work as a part-time demonstrator in anatomy at the University of Western Ontario. At 2 a.m., Banting sat at his desk, desperately preparing a lecture on carbohydrate metabolism, a subject in which he possessed absolutely zero expertise. He opened the November issue of Surgery, Gynecology, and Obstetrics. Inside, he found a deeply obscure autopsy report by Dr. Moses Barron. Barron documented a rare anomaly, a patient whose main pancreatic duct was blocked by a gallstone. The blockage caused the trypsin-producing digestive cells, the acini, to atrophy, necrotize, and die. But the islets of Langerhans, the theoretical factory for the elusive hormone, survived the blockage perfectly intact. Banting stared at the page. The mathematical elegance of the solution hit him. If the destructive digestive cells are killed off while the organ is still inside a living host, there is no trypsin left to destroy the hormone during extraction. He grabbed a notebook. He scribbled 25 grammatically flawed words that would alter the genetic destiny of humanity. Diabetes. Ligate pancreatic ducts of dog. Keep dogs alive till acini degenerate leaving islets. Try to isolate the internal secretion to relieve glycosuria. On November 7, 1920, Banting stood in the opulent wood-paneled office of Professor John James Rickard MacLeod at the University of Toronto. MacLeod reigned as the undisputed apex predator of metabolic physiology. He authored the definitive global textbook on carbohydrate metabolism. He directed an elite, heavily funded laboratory and routinely corresponded with the Nobel laureates of Europe. Banting, sweating, and stuttering pitched his crude surgical workaround. MacLeod listened in stunned, silent contempt. When Banting finished, the professor systematically dismantled the young man's delusion. He listed the staggering biochemical failures of the European elite over the last 30 years. He pointed out Banting's absolute lack of biochemical training, his 0 hours of surgical experience with dogs, and his glaring ignorance of the current scientific literature. MacLeod noted that Banting did not even know the correct spelling of the disease he proposed to cure. MacLeod ordered him out, but Banting returned. He returned 3 times, obsessively hammering at the professor's defenses, demanding laboratory space. MacLeod, calculating that a rapid, localized failure would permanently neutralize this uncredentialed pest, made a cynical strategic concession. He possessed a derelict, unventilated attic on the top floor of the medical building. MacLeod granted Banting access to the squalid room, an 8-week window during the dead heat of the 1921 summer, and an allocation of exactly 10 stray dogs from the city pound. MacLeod refused to pay Banting a salary. As a final afterthought, he assigned 2 22-year-old undergraduate students, Charles Best and Clark Noble, to handle the complex chemical blood assays that Banting was wildly unqualified to perform. Best and Noble flipped a coin to determine who would take the first 4-week shift in the sweltering attic. Best won the toss. On June 14, 1921, Professor MacLeod boarded a transatlantic steamer bound for the cool, aristocratic estates of Scotland. He left behind an arrogant, unshakable certainty. The greatest scientific minds in history had failed to extract the internal secretion. MacLeod knew the disgraced surgeon would slaughter 10 stray dogs, fail completely, and vanish from the scientific record before the autumn semester began. The human body operates on a relentless microscopic economy of glucose. It serves as the sole metabolic currency powering 30 trillion individual cells. But this currency remains utterly useless without a chemical key to unlock the cellular membrane. That key is the internal secretion of the islets of Langerhans. In a healthy system, the pancreas detects rising blood sugar and deploys this hormone. The hormone binds to cellular receptors. The membrane opens. The cell absorbs the glucose and incinerates it for energy. In the diabetic body, this communication network suffers a catastrophic, permanent blackout. The islets of Langerhans cease production. The glucose key vanishes. The blood floods with energy from digested food, pushing sugar concentrations to 0.10, 0.20, and 0.30%. But the cellular doors remain locked shut. 30 trillion cells starve in an ocean of abundance. A biological panic ensues. The starving brain transmits emergency signals. The liver, attempting to save the failing system, breaks down its emergency reserves of glycogen, dumping massive waves of pure glucose into the already supersaturated bloodstream. The blood transforms into a thick, viscous syrup. The renal system initiates a desperate filtration protocol. The kidneys draw massive volumes of water from surrounding tissue to flush the toxic sugar load into the urine, triggering rapid, catastrophic dehydration. Deprived of glucose, the cells cannibalize the body's structural foundation. They burn skeletal muscle. They incinerate fat stores. This emergency lipolysis floods the vascular system with highly acidic ketone bodies, driving the blood pH down toward a lethal threshold. The metabolic engine tears itself apart. Frederick Banting did not attempt to halt this collapse with advanced chemistries. He possessed no biochemical pedigree. He approached the impenetrable lockbox with the crude mechanical pragmatism of an orthopedic surgeon. He viewed the pancreas not as a chemical mystery, but as a structural battlefield. The organ operates as a dual-purpose factory. 99% of its mass consists of exocrine tissue, the acinar cells. Their sole directive involves manufacturing trypsin, a violent digestive enzyme engineered by evolution to break down complex proteins in the small intestine. Just 1% of the organ's mass consists of endocrine tissue, the islets of Langerhans. These microscopic clusters float in the acinar sea, manufacturing the life-saving glucose key. The elite European physiologists tried to chemically extract the 1%, but the millisecond their scalpels pierced the organ, the 99% released the trypsin. The digestive enzyme instantly shredded the delicate hormone protein. Banting's strategy bypassed chemical extraction entirely. He engineered a localized, controlled cellular genocide. Operating on the wooden tables of the Sweltering attic laboratory, Banting opened the abdomens of the stray dogs. He located the pancreatic ducts, the physical tubes that transport the destructive trypsin from the pancreas to the intestine. Using surgical silk, he ligated the ducts. He tied them off tight, severing the supply lines. He sutured the dogs closed and waited. Over the next 7 weeks, a biological siege ravaged the animals' abdomens. Blocking the ducts forced the powerful trypsin to back up into the pancreas. The exocrine factory choked on its own product. The acinar cells swelled, ruptured, and underwent complete necrotic degeneration. The trypsin-producing cells systematically died off. The islets of Langerhans, however, did not rely on the ducts. They secreted their hormone directly into the bloodstream. They survived the localized slaughter completely intact. 7 weeks later, Banting and Best reopened the dogs. The pancreas no longer resembled a robust pink organ. It had withered into a shriveled, atrophied nub of tissue. Banting had successfully eradicated the trypsin threat. He broke the biological lockbox. Banting excised the surviving islets. To guarantee absolute suppression of any residual enzymatic activity, he threw the tissue into a freezing, sub-zero mortar. He added chilled Ringer's solution. He poured in raw silica sand. He and Best ground the surviving tissue into a fine, granular paste, physically shattering the cell walls of the islets to release the trapped hormone. They filtered the cold slush through a simple paper funnel. The liquid emerged murky, thick, and highly unrefined. Banting called the crude extract isletin. It was pure, undigested salvation. And he held exactly 4 cubic centimeters of it in a glass syringe, standing over dog 410. The plunger hits the bottom of the glass barrel. 4 cubic centimeters of crude, sub-zero isletin flood into dog 410's jugular vein. The biological payload enters the vascular system and races toward the starving cells. Banting and Best pull the needle, apply pressure to the puncture, and start the clock. They draw blood samples at precise, agonizing intervals, running the chemical assays on the attic workbench. At hour 0, the terrier's blood glucose registers a lethal 0.20%. 60 minutes later, Best runs the second assay. The reagent chemical reacts, shifting color to reveal the new concentration. The glucose level has plummeted to 0.12%. 1 hour after that, a third draw. The concentration registers at 0.1%. The biochemical blackout lifts. Inside the animal, the exogenous isletin binds to the cellular receptors. The membranes unlock. 30 trillion cells aggressively absorb the suspended glucose, incinerating it for immediate energy. The liver halts its frantic glycogen dump. The kidneys cease the catastrophic water purge. The terrier opens its eyes. The heavy, ketone-laced hyperventilation smooths into a steady, rhythmic breathing pattern. Dog 410 lifts its head from the wooden table. It stands up. It walks to a water bowl, drinks, and wags its tail. The absolute death sentence of diabetes has been reversed. Banting and Best repeat the procedure to establish undeniable scientific redundancy. They deliberately induced diabetes in dog 92, a yellow collie named Marjorie, and keep her alive for 70 consecutive days using daily injections of the crude extract. But the biological logistics present a lethal bottleneck. Ligating the ducts of live dogs requires 7 weeks of waiting for the acinar tissue to necrotize. The math fails some. They cannot harvest enough atrophied dog pancreases to save a single human child, let alone a hospital ward of thousands. Banting needs a massive, immediate supply of trypsin-free islets. He finds the solution in the brutal efficiency of the local slaughterhouses. Banting realizes that the digestive enzymes of a mammalian embryo remain inactive until birth. A fetal calf possesses a fully developed pancreas, flush with islets of Langerhans. But its exocrine cells have not yet begun producing the destructive trypsin. The lockbox is naturally open. Banting and Best abandon the surgical ligation protocol. They secure access to the abattoirs, harvesting fetal calf pancreases by the dozen, bypassing the 7-week incubation period entirely, and scaling islatin production from cubic centimeters to liters. As the summer heat breaks, Professor J.J.R. MacLeod returns from his Scottish vacation. He expects to find the derelict attic abandoned and the disgraced surgeon vanished. Instead, Banting drops 70 days of airtight, undeniable chemical data onto MacLeod's mahogany desk. The professor realizes the impossible has occurred. The uncredentialed amateur has shattered the greatest biological barrier of the century. MacLeod's posture shifts instantly from arrogant dismissal to aggressive, calculated acquisition. He recognizes the monumental implications and the impending Nobel Prize. He commandeers the project. MacLeod immediately floods Banting's operation with university funding and resources, moving them out of the attic and into pristine, state-of-the-art laboratories. But MacLeod also identifies the fatal flaw in Banting's crude isletin. The extract works on dogs, but it is too thick, too volatile, and too saturated with excess animal proteins to inject into a human child without triggering severe anaphylactic shock or massive abscesses. To solve this, MacLeod brings in Dr. James Collip, a brilliant, highly credentialed biochemist. Collip possesses the exact chemical pedigree that Banting lacks. His mandate is absolute: purify the extract. The raw, mechanical breakthrough of the surgeon is immediately subordinated to the refined chemistry of the academic elite, triggering a violent battle for control of the cure. On December 30, 1921, Professor J.J.R. MacLeod stood before the Association of American Physicians in Washington, D.C. He delivered the preliminary data on the pancreatic extract to the most elite, heavily credentialed medical authorities in North America. MacLeod did not invite Frederick Banting to the podium. Standing before his peers, MacLeod repeatedly utilized the pronoun we. He framed the surgical breakthrough as the logical triumph of his own laboratory, systematically marginalizing the broke surgeon who actually shattered the biological lockbox. Banting sat in the audience, furious and financially destitute, watching an academic aristocrat steal the miracle of the sweltering attic. MacLeod's control over the project solidified behind the locked doors of the biochemistry lab. Dr. James Collip, MacLeod's handpicked biochemist, attacked the lethal impurities in Banting's crude isletin. Collip executed a masterclass in fractional alcohol precipitation. He recognized that Banting's extract contained the life-saving hormone, but it remained fatally saturated with heavy animal proteins and salts. Injecting this thick sludge into a human triggered violent immune responses and massive sterile abscesses. Collip systematically increased the concentration of alcohol in the extract. He discovered the precise mathematical tipping point. At an 80% alcohol concentration, the heavy, toxic proteins precipitated out of the solution, dropping to the bottom of the beaker as a useless sludge. The pure, delicate endocrine hormone remained perfectly suspended in the clear liquid above. When he pushed the alcohol concentration past 90%, the pure hormone itself precipitated out, allowing him to capture it in a solid, pristine, water-soluble powder. Collip isolated the exact chemical mechanism required to strip the poison from the cure, but he refused to share the formula. Operating under MacLeod's umbrella of academic arrogance, Collip viewed Banting as a crude butcher. Collip claimed the chemical purification as his own independent breakthrough and threatened to patent the purified serum himself. The tension inside the medical building fractured. The biological war against diabetes degraded into a physical brawl. In a university hallway, the orthopedic surgeon confronted the elite biochemist. Words failed. Banting lunged at Collip. He tackled the biochemist to the floor, driving his fists into Collip in a blind rage over the stolen chemistry. Charles Best physically dragged the furious surgeon off the bloodied chemist. The laboratory ceased functioning. The men refused to speak. But the biological clock of Ward H at the Toronto General Hospital did not care about academic egos. On January 11, 1922, Leonard Thompson lay dying in a hospital cot. The 14-year-old boy weighed exactly 65 pounds. He was a skeleton wrapped in pale, translucent skin, his breath heavily saturated with the chemical stench of lethal ketones. The Allen diet had failed. The starvation protocol had reached its absolute physiological limit. Thompson was slipping into a terminal diabetic coma. Desperate to beat Collip and MacLeod, Banting authorized the injection of his own unrefined, thick extract. A physician plunged 15 cubic centimeters of the murky fluid into Thompson's left buttock. The medical elite watched. The result was a catastrophic failure. Thompson's blood glucose dropped a negligible fraction. The ketones continued to ravage his bloodstream. Massive, painful, sterile abscesses erupted at the injection sites. The thick animal proteins triggered an immediate toxic reaction. The attending physicians sneered. Banting's mechanical miracle was biologically incompatible with human physiology. The elite consensus reasserted itself. The boy was going to die. 12 days passed. The infighting ceased under the crushing weight of Thompson's impending physiological collapse. Banting surrendered his ego. He allowed Collip's highly purified, alcohol-fractionated serum to enter Ward H. On January 23, 1922, the clinical staff returned to the dying 14-year-old. Thompson's blood glucose had spiked to an apocalyptic 0.520%. His system was completely flooded with acid. He was hours away from total organ failure. The attending physician injected Collip's clear, refined serum. They drew blood. They ran the assays. Within 24 hours, the biochemical siege collapsed. Thompson's blood glucose plummeted from 0.5120% to a perfectly normal 0.120%. The chemical reagent tests for ketones in his urine came back completely negative. The toxic acidity vanished. The heavy, labored gasping ceased. The microscopic locks on 30 trillion cells opened simultaneously. The glucose rushed across the cellular membranes. The boy opened his eyes. He sat up. He looked at his father. The absolute, unyielding death sentence of diabetes mellitus type 1 had been executed, reversed, and obliterated in exactly 24 hours. The breakthrough in Ward H triggered a biochemical gold rush. The state-sponsored starvation protocol collapsed overnight. Across North America, the agonizing rows of emaciated, dying children transformed into resurrection wards. The elite medical establishment, which had previously mandated starvation diets of 400 calories, scrambled to acquire the purified, alcohol-fractionated serum. Physicians holding vials of the isolated hormone walked down aisles of completely comatose patients. They drove glass syringes into the atrophied muscles of children who were mere hours away from total metabolic death. The biological reversal defied human comprehension. Before the attending doctors even reached the end of the hospital ward, the children at the beginning of the aisle opened their eyes. They sat up. The heavy, acidic ketone stench vanished from the air. 30 trillion cellular membranes unlocked. The dead awoke. The medical aristocracy possessed no choice but to bend the knee to the undeniable math of salvation. But the academic elite did not surrender their prestige willingly. On October 25, 1923, the Nobel Committee in Stockholm convened to award the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. They recognized the shattering of the biological lockbox. The laureates, Frederick Banting and Professor J.J.R. MacLeod, the scientific establishment successfully grafted its apex predator onto the raw mechanical genius of the sweltering attic. Banting was violently enraged. Professor MacLeod did not ligate a single pancreatic duct. He did not run a single blood assay. MacLeod was vacationing on the moors of Scotland when Dog 410 stood up and wagged its tail. In a brutal, highly public rebuke of the academic hierarchy, Banting immediately wired half of his Nobel Prize money to Charles Best. He forced the international scientific record to acknowledge the 22-year-old undergraduate who actually ground the silica sand and suffered in the 90-degree heat of room 42. Humiliated by the public exposure, MacLeod quietly surrendered half of his own prize money to James Collip. The purified chemical formula represented incalculable absolute wealth. The team held the exclusive biological key to millions of human lives, possessing a total monopoly over human carbohydrate metabolism. Pharmaceutical corporations offered vast fortunes to control the proprietary rights to the serum. Banting stripped the elite of their final weapon, corporate greed. On January 23, 1923, Banting, Best, and Collip secured the American patent for the extraction and purification of insulin. They did not leverage the biological weapon for profit. They signed the global patent rights over to the University of Toronto. The total purchase price was exactly $1 for each of the three men. Banting sealed the transaction with a definitive, unalterable mandate. Insulin does not belong to me. It belongs to the world. The discovery of insulin stands as a devastating indictment of academic arrogance. For 30 years, the most heavily decorated physiological minds in Europe and North America surrendered to a microscopic failure. Men bearing advanced doctorates from Heidelberg, Cambridge, and the Rockefeller Institute looked at hospital wards filled with starving, skeletal children and classified their mass slaughter as a fixed, unalterable physiological reality. They built an entire medical doctrine around delaying the inevitable through forced starvation. They codified the absolute impossibility of extracting the internal secretion. They declared the biology permanently unsolvable. The genetic destiny of humanity did not pivot on their sterile, heavily funded consensus. It pivoted on a deeply indebted, disgraced orthopedic surgeon who earned exactly $4 in his first month of private practice. Frederick Banting walked into a derelict, unventilated attic on the top floor of a university that held him in absolute contempt. Armed with a grammatically flawed 25-word hypothesis, an undergraduate assistant, and a pack of stray dogs from the city pound, he bypassed the chemical lockbox entirely. He refused to accept the surrender of the elite. He mechanically dismantled the deadliest metabolic failure in human history, broke the biological siege, and dragged millions of humans back from the absolute brink of death.